Welcome back, everyone. Today I wanted to finish off our first unit that we've been taking a look at with an introduction to what the humanities are, some of the central questions humanities, and then we've been taking a look the last couple of weeks at visual art and then applying that to elements of how to represent the divine, taking a look at the Renaissance as one of the key foundational elements within the Western art. I wanted to finish off as we start to end unit number 1, taking a look at the contemporary world and how this is distinctly different from the Renaissance. Even though the Renaissance is casting a very large shadow over the contemporary world, in some ways the Renaissance is still influencing the way that contemporary art works, but it's influencing in the way of how do we do something different? How do we do something beyond what they used to do? And so what I want to do is I want to make an argument for you today about why modern art looks so different. As you see these images here, the walking man or Marilyn Monroe or a wrapped bottle, what you're going to see is that modern or contemporary art is going to be very different from the Renaissance. And unfortunately, too often the novice that's unfamiliar with art comes to contemporary art with a misunderstanding, a belief that contemporary artists are trying to pull one over or make fun of the viewer or to try to get away with cheating the museum or something of that effect. I want to just give you some context, and then you can make up your own mind on what modern or contemporary artists are seeking to do. But just by way of review, the Renaissance visual art, what they were seeking to do is mimic the natural world. Art should represent the way that humanity sees the world. And so what we generally see with Michelangelo or Jan van Eyck is they're trying to mimic the way in which the world looks, right? And trying to visually portray reality, right? So the idea is that the artist is like unto a god and has the ability to create, and God or Heavenly Father has given us the blueprint of divine, of perfection, of the natural world that we live in, and so artists were supposed to reflect that. What changes the art world, however, is the camera, right? That the idea that the artist had this kind of monopoly over representing the physical, visual world ended with the camera, right? And it's not as though the artist can't, paint anything realistic today, but when the camera enters, you don't necessarily need an artist to be able to paint your portrait, right? All you need is a camera and someone be able to click a button. And so the camera really changed the way in which art looks. And so it's still kind of grappling with that. The artists at the time when this was happening, we'll take a look in the next lecture when we take a look at photography, how where photography comes from and the development of the camera. But what happens at that time in the 19th century, artists had a decision to make. Either we can keep doing the same thing and go extinct, or we can try to do something new. And so since that time, they've been trying to do something new and moving away from just simply mimicking the natural world. Unfortunately, too many people today come to the art world believing that this is the only way to do art, right? So the Brian Regan way, if it's a bowl of fruit, it should look like a bowl of fruit. Well, artists today are saying, well, we're not really living in that day and age. We're not really living in the Renaissance. The camera changed everything for us, and so now we have to do something inherently different. Part of what they start doing is rather than representing the outer world, they start representing the inner world, the inner insights, right? What's the one thing that an artist has that a camera doesn't? A camera is scientific. It's just, technology. It just captures what it's seeing, right? But the artist can add his own or her own insights and direction, right? And it's not to say that photographer doesn't have artistic components to it. But what it's suggesting is art tries to do something completely different from the camera, trying to move away from that visual reality. Another element that we see with contemporary art, and this is a reading I had you do for this week, is by John Dewey, Art as Experience, right? Past art, the common conception that work of art is often identified with a building, a book, a painting, or a statue in its existence apart from human experience. When an art product, right, whether that's a painting or a sculpture, something like that, once attains classic status, it somehow becomes isolated from the human conditions under which it was brought into being and from the human consequences it engenders of the actual life experience. And so what he suggests here is whether it's a Leonardo or Van Gogh or something of that nature, once it enters into this status of this is art and this is important art, right? Great art, a masterpiece. It's then put in a museum and locked away from human experience, right? So, but the idea is that art always is about reflecting the human experience. What are the values? What are the ideas of the artist? And how is the artist interacting with his or her own culture, right? So it's part of the human statement. And what he suggests is that past art starts to move away from human experience as we lock it up in a museum. It almost is separate from us now, right? It's kind of confined to its own kind of quasi or secular temple that we have built for art, right? Otherwise known as a museum. And then we can go and visit it, but it's separate from what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. And what he suggests is that contemporary art or postmodern art, what it seeks to do is it seeks to focus on experience, right? Experience is a transformational interaction into participation and communication. And so a central component to contemporary art is not going to be about representing reality, the bowl of fruit to look like a bowl of fruit. It's going to be how well it captures participation and communication of human experience, right? It's going to be about that as a central driving force. Art is thus prefigured in the very process of living, right? So the idea is that it has to be a living, active process. Art denotes the process of doing or making, hence the expression of art is emotional and guided by a purpose. And so one major element that I want you to understand with contemporary art is it's not, number one, it's not trying to recreate visual reality, right? That ended with for the most part, it ended with the 19th century and the camera. And number two, what contemporary art seeks to do is it seeks to be alive and seeks to be capturing what humans are doing, not being locked up necessarily in a museum. We'll kind of take a look at that as we go forward today. Here's my definition of contemporary art, right? A historical, cultural, and social period that began after World War II. It mistrusts authority. Contemporary art generally mistrusts authority due to inherent human corruptions. It critiques past theories and ideas because such concepts have proved to be inadequate and problematic. And so the idea is that we can't necessarily trust our political institutions because we have corrupt leaders. We can't necessarily trust our social institutions because human nature is fallen and then tends to be corrupt, right? If we give money to a charity, then all of a sudden we find out that that charity is actually not really, the money that we're giving to the charity doesn't necessarily go to where it was supposed to, right? So there's some problems with human corruption, right? And it critiques the past theories and ideas because such concepts have proved to be inadequate or problematic. And so the ideas of the past have gotten us to the problems that we're facing today. And so those are problematic as well. And they stifle change. Its cultural manifestations invert or redefine traditional ideas to bring new understandings and complexities to light. And so its cultural manifestations such as art or film or books or something like that, it inverts or redefines traditional ideas. And so you see that with Maleficent or Into the Woods. What we see with them is that you have the traditional story of Sleeping Beauty with Maleficent, for instance. And now we see the story of not the wicked witch, but actually the good wood goddess who was actually mistreated by the king. And so the king's actually the bad guy, and Maleficent's actually the loving goddess who's watching over Sleeping Beauty. So it's giving a different interpretation of the Disney interpretation. So it's taking that old idea and flipping on its head. Or Twilight, as you see in the top left-hand corner, takes the idea of a vampire, which is traditionally something monstrous and scary, and inverts it into something dreamy that glistens in the sun. And so it's taking old ideas and suggesting we might find new value to them. And so that's one element that contemporary art seeks to do. Postmodern or contemporary art is an era that has tension with the past and also has great uncertainty about the future of humanity. And so we see a lot of dystopian ideas emerge within the art medium today, as we see with The Giver or I Am Legend or the Hunger Games. We see a constant tension about we're not sure where we're going. So we feel as though in the contemporary art, we feel as though we're kind of standing on the edge of a cliff or a precipice. And we are not sure, first of all, we're not sure about the traditions that got us to this cliff, and we're not sure about what's going to happen tomorrow, right? Because we can face anything from a nuclear holocaust to biological warfare, or, for instance, a pandemic that could wipe out, so to speak, human civilization, right? And so we're greatly concerned about that. Contemporary art or postmodern art, I'm kind of using them interchangeably here. What I generally see with them is that there really is no fixed narrative. As we see with Caravaggio's the Judith and Holofernes painting on the right hand side, that's telling a story. It's telling a story about Judith going in and seducing Holofernes and cutting off his head and saving the Israelites. But what we have with the contemporary art is we have film, TV that tells stories much better than visual art, than a static two-dimensional canvas can do. And so they're not really about trying to compete with that. They're trying to do something different. And so generally there's no fixed story that's being told, right? That used to happen in the past because that was the method that we had to visualize a story. But now we have different methods. We have better methods to do than just painting on a canvas. And so generally the fine art seeks to do something a little bit different than that. Generally what it's seeking to do, though, and this gets back to Dewey's idea, is it blurs the relationship between art and the artist, trying to make it more of a living process, right? That art as a process of creation, rather than something that you finish, you put in a museum, you lock away behind a wall and put glass over it to protect it, right? To separate it from human experience. It's more about the process of creation. It generally seeks to examine culture, right? More of kind of has sometimes a social or a political bent to it, to get us to think more deeply about the world around us. And it also seeks to include as much as possible viewer participation. And some art's going to do that better than others, but in some way it's trying to make us become part of the experience. And we'll take a look at some of those today. And some of the art that I had you do for the Zoom, or will have you do for the Zoom whenever you're listening to this, I wanted to start with Giacometti. Umberto Giacometti, Italian artist. He was heavily influenced by the Holocaust and how we often try to exterminate entire races of people. He had great fears about the direction of humanity, believing that they were on the brink of extinction, right? So again, that fear of tomorrow, whether there will be a tomorrow. I grew up during the Cold War, and my thought was there could never be a tomorrow. I did not think that I was going to live to see 25 because I thought there was going to be a nuclear holocaust, right? So there's that great uncertainty that we're living in the contemporary world. And we're facing similar ideas with this, with radical jihadist groups, radical Islamic groups that are, seeking to promote terrorism throughout the world, or we see that often with mass shootings. We see it, this kind of fear of tomorrow with now facing environmental issues or virus issues, things of that nature. So we feel as though we're on the brink of extinction, right? That we feel, and we kind of use this within our own church rhetoric, where the second coming, right? The second coming feels like it's close by, right? Thus, his sculptures, right? His art as a sculptor reveals frail, hauntingly thin forms. His works undertake the postmodern world's challenge with such things as nuclear holocaust, biological and chemical warfare, diseases such as cancer, Ebola, AIDS, coronavirus, environmental issues such as global warming and pollution, etc. And he captures our fears about tomorrow while displaying a muted hope in the future. And so this is what his art looks like. And initially what people say is, this looks ugly, right? This is not a pretty work of art. And Giacometti says, exactly. And what his argument is, it's not supposed to be, right? This is not supposed to be the Renaissance beautiful human being of the ideal, right? He's suggesting this is the representation of where humanity is today. We're not quite living, but we're not quite dead. We're somewhere kind of weirdly in between as we're on this kind of brink of extinction. But this is really what he was influenced by. He was influenced by these Holocaust survivors who were coming out of the concentration camps that were hauntingly thin, with their skin kind of loosely hanging on their bodies. They weren't quite alive, but they also weren't quite dead. They just kind of had this glazed look in their eye because of the mass starvation, the mass brutality that they face on a day-to-day basis. And so in some ways, he's representing this is a typical of the modern contemporary human existence. This is who we are in the world today. Not quite dead, but not quite alive. And it's not as though he's trying to pick on the Holocaust. He actually saw tremendous amount of hope within them. This is called the walking man, not the sitting down man, not the giving up man. What he suggests is that even though we're faced with such tremendous obstacles, we need to get up and we need to move on. We can't just give up as humanity, right? This is me standing in front of the walking man. This is at the Art Institute in Chicago, just to give you the sense of size. But what I'm going to have you do in the Zoom, or what I did have you do in the Zoom, is compare and contrast these two works, right? So as you prepare for Wednesday Zoom, or if you had Zoom on Monday, you can kind of reflect on your thoughts, maybe have some new insights. But what I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you think about which one displays more heroic qualities, right? Both of them, even though they're very different in their design, they're different in their medium, right? Where we have Michelangelo's made of marble and Walking Man's made of bronze, different in medium, but they're both very similar in their representation of the human condition. Both of them are symbols, right? What we see with Michelangelo is it's a symbol of the Renaissance. What we see with Giacometti's, this is a symbol of the contemporary world. And in this way, they're representing what humanity is experiencing. They're reflecting the culture that they live in. And so some people push back on this and say, well, wait a minute, I don't like this because they're so different. Yes, they look visually different, but their ideals, what they're trying to promote, is also very similar, right? The ideal of what we should do, the heroism of how to do it, right? We see that embedded within both of them, right? So I want you to think about which one is more inspirational to you and why, right? So this will get into some of our discussion board questions. We'll pick up on this. Which one is a better representation of humanity? Which one's more accurate? And then think about which one do you like better. And what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to get you to avoid that knee-jerk reaction as if it's not pretty, I must not like it, right? As the old cliche goes, most people think that they know what they like, but they really only like what they know. My job in this class is to get you to know more so that you can appreciate more on a deeper level, right? And so at first you might not have liked Giacometti, but hopefully what I'm getting to do, and I'm not trying to necessarily convert you into his camp per se, but I'm at least trying to get you to understand where this is coming from and why it looks different, right? Let's take a look at Jackson Pollock. He's always a tough one as a tough sell because he's generally put up as the pinnacle of, pointless art. And I wanted to kind of push against that. I know that's kind of the social trend out in the world. I know that that's probably what Brian Regan would say about him, but if we maybe understand the context a little bit more, we can at least understand where he's coming from. Rather than depicting the outer world, Pollock turned inward, right? Again, moving away from the camera, right? The camera is doing something different. And so artists are now going to do something, right? That's different from the camera, right? So we see these two separate paths from the camera and from what artists fine art seeking to do. Pollock turned inward to represent his inner mind. He felt that studying the mind would help to uncover truths that are generally hidden from the human eye. And so he too is seeking to understand truth. And what he's suggesting is that embedded within the human psyche are impulses, rage, anger, frustration, love, right? That we're all experiencing in the contemporary world. And maybe if he can unlock those feelings, we can find more commonalities in the world. And we can alleviate the suffering that we feel because we don't understand these elements. Because we continue to feel that we are not understood and we don't understand others, right? Take a look at his method.
When I am painting, I have a general notion as to what I am about. I can control the flow of the paint. There is no accident. Just as there is no beginning and no end.
So what we see here with that idea that there is no beginning, there is no end, it's mainly about the process. It's not about necessarily telling a story. It's about creating something and the process of creating something. So here we see the process of him creating his brushstrokes, right? We see the colors that he's using. But what he's trying to do is he's trying to express his inner feelings and how he's supposed to kind of come to a greater understanding. So this is about an inward journey to understand the self. And the idea is that if he can then understand himself, there might be some universal truths that will help us as a human species to better understand ourselves as well. And most people take a look at this, they dismiss it, and they say, well, any child can do this, or this is just chaotic, right? They just say that this is just chaos on a canvas. And he would argue, yes, that's the world that we live in. We live in a chaotic world. We live in a world of uncertainty. Art reflects the world in which it's created, right? And so this is him trying to make sense of the chaos in which we live. I wanted to show you this image. This image was taken by, this photo was taken by one of the professors in the humanities department when he was at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. And he was sitting in front of Autumn Rhythm, the artwork that I've been showing you. There was a student who probably was assigned by her humanities class to go to the MoMA and experience the art there, right? And so he said initially as she was walking by this, and it's pretty large, I would say it's probably about 15 feet long, when she got about halfway through, right, she's just kind of had her earbuds in looking at the floor, but she got halfway through, she kind of looked up, she took a step back, she kind of, took this kind of big breath, and then she walked all the way to where she was, right, at the beginning of her kind of walk through Autumn Rhythm. And then she very slowly and carefully walked through it. And then the professor kind of took a picture of this, seeing this as an experience, right? That this is not just the experience of Jackson Pollock to create a work of art. It's also the experience of the viewer to feel it and to be immersed in it. And it's really easy to take a look at a Jackson Pollock on a digital image and be dismissive of it. It's another thing to be standing in the Museum of Modern Art in New York City and actually interact with it, right? So some of you might still kind of say, well, this is still just kind of paint flicked on a canvas. It's still just kind of chaos and anyone can do that. I would say, first of all, go and try it. It's harder than it looks. And number two, go experience a Jackson Pollock because it's more than just paint on a canvas. There's something there. There's something transcendental that happens when you're working your way through it, right? So, and here's his argument. This is what Jackson Pollock says about his art. It says, it seems to me that the painter cannot express this age, the airplane, the atom bomb, the radio, in the old forms of the Renaissance or any other past culture. Our world is significantly different. Art always reflects the world it's created in. Therefore, art needs to change with the world. And so we can't keep expecting art to look like the Renaissance, right? We need to kind of abandon that and look for the new ways to express our own age, right? Our own experiences within our age. He says, each age finds its own technique. The modern artist, it seems to me, is working and expressing an inner world. In other words, expressing the energy, the motion, and other inner forces. And so he suggests that because of the atomic bomb, because of the Holocaust, because of all these atrocities that we face, we need to turn inward to understand what's happening with all of this aggression. What's happening with all of this miscommunication? That reason, science, has failed us in the modern world. We start developing things that can end all life on Earth within 15 minutes. We start developing things that create misunderstandings and miscommunications. We have social media today, which makes communication a lot easier, but do we understand each other any better? And he's suggesting that reason only produces misunderstanding and problems. And so what we really need to do, instead of focusing on the Apollonian side of our brain, we need to focus more on the Dionysian side. What we're losing in our world today is the ability to feel, is spirituality. And so his art is all about feeling. It's all about emotion, right? This one, this is number 5. It broke the record at the time in 2006 as the highest paid for painting in the world when it went up for auction. So one person can argue, right, kind of the skeptic could argue, well, that's just an idiot paying for that, 140 million. But another person could suggest maybe there's something more to it that we need to look a little bit deeper. And so what I'm suggesting to you today is not necessarily that you have to buy into any of this, of what contemporary art is seeking to do, but at least understand that it's going to take more work on our part to be able to understand, right? It's pretty easy to take a look at the Sistine Chapel and say, that's beautiful. What I'd rather you do is you take a look at contemporary artists saying, that's interesting. I wonder why the artist chose to paint that. or chose to paint it in that way? That's a better question than just this person is trying to fool me, or this person is just trying to be a con artist or something of that regard. Taking a look at these, I had you do this in Zoom on Monday, or if you're on Wednesday's class where we're kind of look forward to doing this. Compare and contrast these two images, right? Consider the artistic elements as you look at the way that these works represent the different values of the human experience, right? So I want you to think about what common desires are illustrated in both works, and how do they both represent what it means to be human. And then which one do you like better, right? How are they both kind of focusing on perhaps creation and the creative process and what's happening within that, right? What's Jackson Pollock's argument about creation? What's Michelangelo's argument about creation, right? So both of them, although again, people push back on when I show these juxtapositions, these, you can't compare and contrast these. There's no way you can compare and contrast them. They're just very different. Yes, they are very different, but the ideas and the values might be similar. And I'm trying to get you to look a little bit deeper to find those. Taking a look at Andy Warhol, no other artist in the contemporary kind of study of art represents us today better than Andy Warhol. He has got us pegged, right? After leaving the world of advertising, Warhol's art focused on representing the rise of consumerism, that is, buying stuff, during the 1950s and 60s. His works are playful representations of a world saturated in media, such as television, film, advertisements. Buying has become humanity's new religion in the postmodern or contemporary world. Entertainers have become our gods. We follow around Jay-Z, we follow around Beyonce, we follow them around to say, what are they doing? And they seem to be now the people that we look to for some type of guidance or insights, or we take a look at the stars on TV or reality TV shows and we elect them to become our leaders, right? So we see these people as entertainers, but we see them as more than that. Warhol's art glamorizes the culture of commercialization. To him, art should be superficial because we live in a superficial society. And so what he does is he takes the ideas of this mass consumerism of buying things and going to the store, and he says, I'm going to bring that to the art world. And so here you see the mass-produced Campbell's soup cans, and he wants to create that as though you're standing in Walmart or Brolam's or wherever you're at, and you're picking out that, black bean soup, and then you move on. And so he suggests art represents the culture, what we value, what's important to us. So this is what we value. This is what is important to us. And here's another kind of example of this. These are some images that BYU Idaho have. They have some Andy Warhols on campus. Generally, they keep them a little bit locked away. But they had an exhibit on Andy Warhol. And so they had his works of the Campbell soup cans, and they also had Marilyn Monroe, who is this icon, larger-than-life person that is almost quasi-worshipped, right, to a point where she has her identity is no longer Norma Jean. It's now she assumes a different identity, becoming Marilyn Monroe, made over, hyper glamorized to the point where she has almost become an idol, right? And then what I wanted you to do in the Zoom, or what you did in the Zoom on Monday, or what you will do in the Zoom if you're in the Wednesday cohort, I want you to compare and contrast these two images, right? Consider the artistic elements that you think about, as you think about these works, as they represent different values of the human experience, right? So how do these works represent cultural values, and which do you think reflects our values today better, right? And which one do you like better? So again, I'm getting you to think about a Renaissance, kind of the tradition of what we think of as the pinnacle of artistic expression, with something more contemporary, to see how they're doing things, although they're different, how they have similar aims and ambitions and thoughts embedded within them. I wanted to leave off with Christo and Jean-Claude. They are husband and wife. She passed away in I think it was 2009, and then I think he recently passed away in either this year or last year. But mainly what they were concerned with is connecting people to art by providing new insights to ordinary objects. And this is the object that he submitted as a grad student, or as a part of his senior project, rather, for art school. And he just took a bottle and he wrapped it with kind of this canvas and twine. And his art professor said, well, that's weird, right? Christo's a good art student. Why would he just do this, right? Would he, was he pressed for time? Why would he just submit a bottle wrapped? And then the more he thought about it, the more he realized that this was actually, there's some genius to it, right? So as he starts to look a little bit deeper for the meaning. And what Christo is seeking to do is to take ordinary elements that are around us, that we're immersed in, and make them a little bit more extraordinary, right? So here what he does in Running Fence is he takes a cloth fence, which is about 18 feet high, and he goes across Northern California all the way into San Francisco Bay. And what he has to do with each of them is he has to go to each individual ranch. This is mainly ranching country up here. Go to each individual rancher and say, hey, I'd like to put a fence up in your lawn or in your land. And the rancher's like, great, need more fence. I have a lot of cattle. And he's like, no, this is going to be an art fence, right? And so they're like, nah, I don't think so. They get off my land. They weren't necessarily so, but then he has to keep working with them. He has to go to each individual rancher and get their approval. He has to go to each county and get a permit. He has to go to each city and get a permit, right? And so he has to go to each of the local communities, work with them as an artist individually, and be able to get their approval. And not only does he get their approval eventually, sometimes it takes years and decades, not only does he get their approval, but he actually gets them out working and helping them. And so it's kind of interesting. So as we take a look at his art, right, what's the point of all this? I wanted to show you, they did a documentary of the Running Fence. I just want to show you a clip of this to give you a sense of, the immediate knee-jerk reaction that I want us to try to avoid, and then to get us to think a little bit deeper about what's the whole point of this.
A bunch of garbage.
Wait a minute, what's about
That's art? Some lousy curtain coming through here with a bunch of city slickers looking at it? What the hell with it? I'm against it. I think it's stupid.
This guy's spending $2 million, $2.5 million in a county of Sonoma, and he's not thinking anything out. He's put money in here.
That don't mean, what kind of art is that? What art is that? Hanging a piece of rag up for 50 miles. I can hang a rag up. I bet he can't even paint a picture. He's an idiot.
It isn't art. A curtain 10 feet long and 18 feet high is not art, and it's not art if it's 24 miles long.
I know something about art. I've enjoyed it for 50 years. I agree not to talk about art because I don't think it is art.
Just stopping there for a minute, you have to realize, right, these people that are so passionate and talking and denouncing, here you see they're at a city count or a county meeting or something of that regard, talking about whether this project should come. And so you have a lot of this kind of Brian Regan mindset about what art is, and that kind of strict that art should be something with a Renaissance. But what you also have, what's important about this, is you have people that would never talk about art now talking about art. Right? They're coming together and they're discussing what art is, and that's exactly what Christo wants.
I don't believe it's art.
Christo and Jean-Claude, nice to have you back in Petaluma. Scoot in a little bit closer so we can hear you talk on the radio.
Good morning.
We're just chatting while Newscope was going on, and I heard that you got some bad news yesterday down in Marin County. You want to tell us about that?
We have the public hearings, and the commission denied the building permits. And basically discussion was by the commission that they doubt an artistic quality of the project. Everything we apply, about the ecological issue, about the technical feasibility of the project, everything was accepted by the commission.
And for the safety?
We appeal already Marin County, and we can have Board of Supervisors to review our appeal the next 2 to 4 weeks.
So again, he fails to get at least that board of approval, and then he has to appeal it and work through the process. And so you have to start wondering why, right? Why go through this? And eventually they did approve it. Eventually they did put it up, and it's up for about maybe 3 weeks, and then they take it down and it's gone forever, right? So again, what's the point of this? Well, think about this. If you're traveling in Rexburg, from Rexburg to Pocatello every day, right? Back and forth, and you just kind of see these big potato fields or these big open spaces with a lot of just this sagebrush that's out there. It kind of dominates the Idaho landscape. And you're just passing through that every day. it starts to kind of blend together. You start to not really notice the world around you, the nature that's there. And but if you're traveling one day and all of a sudden you see an 18-foot high cloth fence, what do? You pull over, you start looking around, you're wondering what's happening, and all of a sudden you turn around and you see that there's 5 other people that are parked that are also wondering the same thing, and all of a sudden you're in the middle of an art discussion. What he suggests is that most people aren't going to go to an art museum in their life, right? Most people think that they know what art is. But what we're lacking is an actual discourse on what art is, or even a discourse on talking to one another and interacting with one another. And so he's trying to bring communities together to talk about what art is, to talk about what we value. Here you have them talking, even though they're kind of denouncing Christo's art and making fun of it to some extent, they're at least talking with one another, and they're talking about what they value, what their standards are, and in a world that seems to be completely replete with them. And so what we're seeing with his art is art is a living process of creation, of interaction, of experience, as John Dewey mentions, right? It's about coming together and interacting. I just want to show you a couple more works of art. This one is done in Paris. He just goes and wraps Pont Neuf, that's Bridge 9, in Paris, and just wraps it. It's up for a couple of days, and then it's gone, and it's gone forever. But again, he's taking ordinary things that you just kind of walk across the bridge every day, don't really think about it, but once it's wrapped, it now has new meaning. Or he takes he wraps some islands. This one's out in Miami, just south of Miami, with a bunch of islands that are out there. And he takes this canvas and he just wraps it. And he goes to the University of Miami and has local students coming out and helping him. And he's always trying to incorporate the local community to be part of the discussion, be part of the creation. Right? He's designing it, but then the community comes together and helps to create it. Or this is his umbrella project that he did in the 90s. This is by far his most expensive one. This would have cost him in 2015 dollars, $45 million. And so he just does, he just litters, this is again in Northern California, litters Northern California with all of these umbrellas, not necessarily always quote unquote wrapping things, but trying to use some type of cloth or fabric to give new meaning experience. And then he did a sister project to this. The umbrellas were blue in Japan, and so he has this kind of East meets West kind of vibe. This one he did in 2005. He wraps Central Park. This is called Gates. And again, it's not wrapping it per se, but it's using cloth and fabric in order to create a new experience. And so people were to interact with this. It covered 23 miles. It was up for 16 days, and then it was gone forever. This is the last one that he worked on. He did some floating piers in Lake Iseo in Italy. And what he wanted to do is he took these cubes and he wrapped them right kind of together so that people could walk on water. But again, it's about people coming and interacting and immersing, not only in building and creation, but also in interacting with the artwork itself, that becomes the work of art. And it's only up for a couple of weeks because he doesn't want to create any ecological damage. And he wants to create it as more of an experience of people just kind of going together, this kind of temporary moment. If it's up all the time, right, it's going to create some more damage. And it's also going to be it's going to lose its novelty. But he wants to create a sense of an event that people can come to, that it kind of becomes like a pilgrimage, to be able to bring the local community with the outside community together and to find some type of connection and interaction between them. And this is the last one that he was working on when he died. This is he was going to wrap the Arkansas River, kind of, right? And so here you see that these are his designs. And so some people ask, how is it that he creates so much, money to be able to fund this? He doesn't do corporate sponsors. He says, I don't want to do corporate sponsors. That takes too much headaches. And so what he does is he sells his designs, and he sells pieces of his cloth. And so when he takes down the running fence, what does he do with all of that cloth? Well, he breaks it up, and you can kind of buy your own kind of part of the running fence, and that can be part of your art collection. And so these are the designs that he would sell. And so you can see him putting these ropes on both sides of the Arkansas River, and then he just kind of interlaces, intertwines the fabric, and to be able to then go underneath it and experience it. And wherever he goes, right, generally he's kind of interesting. He has this opposition. People saying it's not art, people that don't want it. People in Colorado did not want this. They didn't want all these people coming in to see this work of art. They wanted to be kind of exclusive. Or New York City, that took him 20 years to be able to get that one approved. And so he's constantly fighting this opposition. But part of the opposition is the artwork, is what we considered art and what we value. And then this is where we left off within our Zoom, or where we will leave off with our Zoom meeting. Compare and contrast these two works, right? How do these works invite the viewers to look deeper? How do they seek to provide new meaning to ordinary life? And then which one do you like better and why? So again, people kind of push back and say, well, these are too different. You can't compare them. Again, in some ways, yeah, they're in a lot of ways, they are different. But in a lot of ways, they also have similar objectives, a similar kind of drive, or a similar kind of thought process that's going into it, or what it's seeking the viewer to do. And so, again, I'm just giving you a brief introduction of what contemporary art is, why it looks so different, and some of the values. And so, as you approach modern art that might look different, or might be something that the kind of knee-jerk reaction is, that's not pretty, right? Rather than saying that's not pretty, I don't like it, think, why did the artist choose to do that? What's going on? And what contemporary art does is it requires you to look deeper, to take more time to think about what the artist is doing, and then learn from that, right? Rather than just kind of immediately being overwhelmed by the beauty. But it reflects the world that we live in. It reflects our values.